Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Ensure and Maintain OCI Security. So my name's Emma, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm joined today by Adil Khan, CEO and founder of SafePaaS. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The session will be recorded for on-demand viewing after the session. And if you do have any questions, then feel free to pop those in the control panel and we'll get to those at the end of the session. So let's take a look. So year after year, the statistics on cyber attacks are growing more alarming. So as October's cybersecurity awareness comes to a close, it's an ideal time to consider some of the pressing challenges that are threatening us and how we can address the emerging cybersecurity issues of our constantly evolving digital world. So as Halloween night is upon us, it's worthy to remember that the terrifying monsters out there are actually real. So let's dig into today's agenda. Well, we'll be covering cyber threats and data governance, OCI, security administration and risks, how automated access controls can help detect and prevent risks. We'll dive into a case study at the end. And then, as I said, if we have time, we'll have some Q&A at the end. So Adil, over to you.
Hey, this is Adil, the hacker on Halloween. I'm here to tell you how to protect yourself against cyber threats and so forth. Emma, if you can share the slide deck. I'm not sure if I can't see it. I'm not sure if we're sharing. There you go, perfect. So yeah, happy Halloween, everybody. So this is a webinar. We'll keep it light. It's Halloween evening, Halloween day. Happy Halloween to everybody. And I'll play the resident hacker and try to make it fun, right? So basically, this is this presentation we put together for Oracle user group a couple of, I guess, a few months now, right? That I presented to a room full of people and got a lot of good interest and feedback. So we thought we celebrate this Halloween and the cybersecurity month with this presentation. So thanks for joining. Yeah, so basically, let's start by just framing the issue, the challenges that we're seeing in the market. I think I don't want to talk a lot about it. I think people are pretty aware, but some of the data always helps for those that are trying to build out, kind of a business case for why this is important, right? So if you guys can put chat questions, please feel free to do those. And in fact, if you can also put some comments in here about how many of you actually use OCI today or planning to migrate to OCI soon, that'll help me focus on the topics more specific to those attendees that are here. And I can see the comments coming in. So basically what I'll cover in the session today, as Emma said a minute ago, is, what are some of the threats that companies are facing, specifically if you're doing OCI, but it's not limited to OCI. If it's some other cloud, whether you're using Google, Amazon, or AWS, it applies to, or Azure, it applies to all these, basically putting your data in the cloud. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works with Oracle. So the key areas, you can read the numbers there on the screen. Basically, the data is growing like crazy. There's a lot of money going into this. And as Cyber Crime Magazine stated, that it's creating a significant amount of anxiety among businesses. And so what we're going to talk about is, how identity risk, identity governance is so important today. Companies that are doing periodic access reviews using spreadsheets, for example, for Oracle database, OS, etc. They're not able to keep up, as OCI is a different animal, right? You've got lots of different flavors of it. You've got multiple pods, and so things are multiplying very quickly as companies are moving more and more of their data to cloud. And again, if it's not OCI, it's AWS or whatever. It's the same concept applies. But we found that customers are frustrated because of the number of errors that are getting generated as a result of error-prone access reviews and data access. So we're going to kind of focus on those two categories because cybersecurity has many aspects from the network to the application, but today's focus is going to be database and below the infrastructure, right? So those are some of the challenges. The next slide is about specific to data governance. That's one of the areas we picked. So cybersecurity has lots of components to it. We're going to focus on data governance and identity governance, but there are many other aspects that I just mentioned that you may want to dig into as part of your overall security plan. And we have a number of resources on our website. You can find more details. So let's talk about data governance. Next slide. As you already got it. Yeah, no, let's just go back to that. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so this is the slide I'm talking about. Yep. And so yeah, the data governance, basically what you can read the definition yourself, but it's about managing the access of your organization data, assets, policies around data, quality of the data, integrity, availability, etc., and identifying those responsibilities and roles around data management, including, for example, storage and usage of data, disposing of data, archiving it. And in the previous years, we've had some really, let me just call more of a maturity around the frameworks, right? So frameworks like PCI, PII, HIPAA, they've been around for decades now. We've had some new interest in the last decade or so from Europe with GDPR principles. We in fact did a presentation to the Oracle user group on that, and also we were published, I think, as a lead article in one of the Insight magazine that the user group publishes periodically. So the goal is to comply with all your data protection, data policies, and use these policies to throughout your identity management systems, whether it's through multi-factor authentication, it's zero trust, zero path, those kinds of tools you have. So that's what we are going to talk about today in terms of what is data governance. The topics around data governance that are important on the next slide are why is data governance important? So you're investing your time here. Clearly, you think it's important, but it's another thing to convince the enterprise, people with budgets and plans to consider that as part of, as we're closing out this year, as you think about the next year. This could be something where you can take some of the content from this presentation today and use that to build the business case. So you can again read the slide, but basically what I'm going to focus on is the ways and why data governance is important. So it's obviously important as we're thinking more about AI as an example, right? To be able to protect our data against AI, yet be able to get better decision making from ChatGPT and other tools that are out, and get reliable responses, because our analytics, our predictive analytics, or our large language models are as good as the data they're built on, right? So having data quality is also part of data governance. That's a really important part that sometimes gets lost in compliance. Obviously, compliance is really important. We just talked about it. So encryption of data, for example, I see that as a requirement almost in all our client third-party vendor management requests. Same thing with transitioning data in transition, data at residency, right? There's some data residency requirements that our clients have across different regions. So if you're doing work in, for example, in Department of Defense, your data, even emails, cannot leave certain markets, let's say US, even though you're the same company operating in UK and US, you have different data segmentation requirements. And that's part of the data governance that we touch on today, but we have a whole lot of other tools and topics to talk about on just that one area. Risk management, just standard risk management, whether it's for your financial risk management, for reporting to the SEC filings, there's special instruction from the Securities and Exchange Commission about identifying any risks and disclose any materialized risks. So that's another important aspect of excuse me, of data risk management. Transparency and accountability, I think it doesn't get enough attention, but that's another major component of risk management. So customer data, right? We just talked about GDPR, but it goes beyond that. It's the ethical use of all data, whether it's in marketing, customer service, sales, whatever, or just compiling credit history and so forth. We need to use the concept of least privileged, right? And there's tons of material on that that we have published, and it's out there on the internet that you can find through the research, reputable research firms. Data integration, another point that is important. So I don't think this a lot, and it's been around forever. Any ERP system I've ever implemented in the last 25 years always has integration, whether it's a GL interface to load a subledger that is very specific to your business model. If you're a car rental company, you may have a rental system that needs to integrate into your GL to report the revenue. Foreign exchange, if you're a global company, which most of our enterprise customers are today, you're transacting globally, you have to have FX exchange interfaces, obviously your bank, your tax, your treasury, all of that falls into that data integration, and a poor integration can result in bad outcomes. So that's also part of the broader data governance use case. Certainly your BI tools and AI tools, as I mentioned, decision-making tools are all data-driven, and the garbage in, garbage out, right? We all know that. So that's basically the big picture, right, of data governance and why one should consider all of these elements when thinking about a use case or the benefits of automating and streamlining and implementing data governance in your organization, or if you have something, making sure that it's all covered. So that was kind of just setting the framework for our discussion. Let's move next into the actual OCI piece, which is the main purpose of today's session. So we'll flash up on slide 9 the actual the framework that you can see on the screen now. So that's a typical framework that you'll see if you're logging into OCI console, right? And what you find there is things that I'll highlight is 3 things, right? So if you're an EBS customer, which many of our OCI customers are also EBS customers, because we've been working with EBS for the last, 20 years, they have different flavors, different options on how to set up OCI. And I just want to level set with everybody on different options available, right? So the one option is that your DBA can just simply install EBS on the Linux server. And the second option is you can let Oracle manage the database for you. And the reason I mention that is because the security is different. Obviously, if you're using your own resources or even third party, let's say you've outsourced this to a third party managed service provider, you have different level of controls and reporting that you have to consider. And I won't have time into getting the details, but I wanted to just level that out up front, that depending on how you configure OCI has different requirements potentially for your audit and compliance and governance, right? Also, today's session is going to be focused on leveraging as much of Oracle technology as possible that's provided to you on OCI, and really like using SafePaaS as your kind of the global repository across all your OCI instances and all your other infrastructure as well, right? So we'll talk a lot about what works in OCI, but also if you have on-premise databases that you haven't moved to OCI, it'll work. Tools, the solution I'm offering today are also going to help you there. So the big challenge underneath this layer is the system accounts, right? We have sys, system, DBA, all the privileges that are assigned to, let's say, an Oracle Apps user through the app schema or the individual module schema, APGL, whatever. Those are all have to be secured even more in the attack surface that makes up the cloud, which has its own dynamics versus everything tucked away nicely behind the firewalls of your on-premise systems, right? So yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about. Also, one thing that we'll talk about is when you set up the identities in this console within Oracle OCI, you also have to consider a periodic access review control. Some call it UAR or PAR, right? That becomes part of the scope, whether you're doing it under your compliance framework from Sarbanes-Oxley or SOC audits, if you're doing those. That all becomes part of the responsibility of identifying and protecting identities in the life cycle that you manage on OCI. Other cool stuff that you get with OCI is the kind of a default web application firewall, which most customers in the old days didn't have. But now that the data is on the internet, you want to be able to protect that. So governing that firewall and all that can be done on this console. So it's a really cool way to kind of get your OCI setup started using the consoles made available. They shield you from all the complexities of the infrastructure. The next slide sort of talks about what are the risks that our customers are reporting on the cloud and how that is mitigated. So yeah, basically the big thing is the insider threat, and SafePaaS spends a lot of time and investments for our clients to protect against the insider threat. This is kind of our legacy. We started in segregation of duties back in the on-premise days and went into other areas around risk management, sensitive access reviews, and then we've sort of built the technology framework now to cover the entire stack, including OCI, right? So it gives you that complete coverage. Unified data access governance is how we call that, right? So unified all your access governance needs under one platform. So human errors, the biggest one you can see, is just getting worse. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So if somebody could, for example, go create a supplier from the front end, but go from the back end and change the supplier bank account, the money is going to end up in that bank account, and that's fraud. That's significant financial misstatement risk to you, right? So, for example, with CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has been saying is that the insider threats are one of the biggest areas that they've watched over the last year or so increase. And most times it's unintentional. Like people just don't know they're not supposed to do certain things. The controls, Oracle does a great job building controls, but they're all like, how should I say that? It's like honor system, right? We expect everybody to do the right thing, but as many of you that work with Oracle or Oracle Cloud would know, a lot of their seeded roles have capabilities to go in and mess things up, and there's also obviously a malicious intent or intentionally causing fraud and so forth. We've seen news every day, every week about that as well. So unfortunately, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure is not immune from all that. The second thing that the bullet point talks about here is the attack surface management, right? So attack surface, by nature of being on cloud, on a public cloud, increases significantly. And there are options. You can do private cloud, but that hinders your ability to take the full benefits of being on the cloud, right? So the key is to really take a hacker's perspective and see how you can tolerate attack to your business infrastructure through the surface. And there's simple things available out there that are very common, like the pen test. We obviously run that in our business. All our clients run that. We look at any issues that are reported as a result of SafePaaS applications being enhanced, modified all the time, or our customers' applications and data that that integrates into SafePaaS. So that's a really important component of managing the surface attacks, and so we're going to talk a little bit about how to control that risk in the next section of this presentation. And then lastly, I'm going to mention a couple other things. One of them is just the APIs. To be able to conduct business today's world, you have the big what I call a SaaS sprawl. average customer of ours with over 500 million in revenue or even less have 100 plus cloud applications. Many of them integrate into your Oracle EBS or Oracle Cloud ERP, whatever Oracle technology you use. You have this sprawl of online applications that are on all the time to make your customer service better, your supply chain stronger, your employee experience better. All of these things you're building online through SaaS applications to become that 24-hour business and improve productivity also has the risk factor because all of these things connect through APIs, and APIs can raise havoc. And not to mention, the last point I'll move on is the default configurations. That's something that most customers do a really good job of catching, but there's always patches and so forth coming in, and there's cross scripting issues. There's SQL injections. So all of these things can happen if the configuration and are not set up. There are many other risks we won't have time to get into, like legal impact on your business if you have lost your credit card information of your customers. But yeah, so it's just a kind of a tip of the iceberg, but you can imagine that this list can be pretty long, and so we need to find a way to protect our OCI investment against cyber threats. Okay, so the next section we move on to is about automating the access controls, the identities that allow people to access the cloud, and the risk that exists in these identities, which will then in turn help you govern your data better, right? So let's take a look at some of the topics here. So here are some of the controls in the next slide that you just pulled up, Emma, that we were talking about. The basics controls. Now we have lots more that we won't have time to cover today, but I wanted to give just the basic checklist that all of you can take from this session and check against what you have today and benchmark it. So periodic access review I mentioned earlier, that's just the very basic control in today's environment, because guess what? You have lots of applications, tons of identities, human, non-human, and they need to be checked. And there's no way human beings can just track all of that without using a system with audit trails. It's just not possible anymore. There are thousands of identities for a typical, even mid-sized business, right? And millions for our bigger customers, enterprise customers. The second thing we'll talk about today is the monitoring of the activities once you have the right people. And going back to my point earlier about insider threat. So you're going to give access to suppliers, of course. If you want to run a business, you're going to give people access to the customer data, employee benefits, payroll. All that data has to go to the people that need to do their jobs, right? But you also want to monitor against risk. So now that you're preventing, the zombies and the other identities from some getting access, now it's time to focus on identities that do have access. And that's, I would have said, in my practice of 25 years doing this, especially in the last 5 years, so I've seen with this identity sprawl, that's the most missed thing. A lot of vendors and consultants and gurus talk a lot about just preventing the network layer or even the application layer, letting people in with the right authorization. But what they're missing and where most of the attacks, if you read about them, where they're coming from, as we mentioned some stats earlier, where people have access to legitimate identity. So it's really important that monitoring is critically performed and taken very seriously. And obviously timely remediation of those risks when they're identified. I've also seen that as a common problem where things get exploited. You identified something, but because you have a complex way to remediate, in other words, you may have to log a ticket in ServiceNow, or you may have to call your help desk, things don't get remediated timely, a ball gets dropped, and that's where we see. And then providing this evidence, right? The last piece of the identity management control that we'll cover is how do you provide an independent evidence that these controls are effective? It's one thing for me to just test my own identities and just tell everybody, oh yeah, I'm secure. That's good, you should start at that. But it's better to build it in a way that an independent auditor can come in as part of your SOC audit, your SOX audit, your PCI, whatever that audit you go through every year. And if you don't, you should do a self audit, right? Because it's a real risk to your business against malware and worse, cyber attacks, ransomware, etc. So yeah, so audit evidence has to be generated. So whatever solution we offer should be such that some third-party auditor can come in and verify that these controls are operating effectively. Okay, the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about each of these controls, right? So next few slides. So periodic access review is a core requirement for most of the, compliant, technology compliant or digital compliant frameworks out there today, including GDPR, SOX, etc. As I mentioned, these are requirements you have to disclose as part of your financial reporting these days, and so it's getting a lot more attention in the last couple of years as SEC has really cracked down on disclosures. And the important thing is, if you're running on OCI, chances are you've got a database, right? You're not just a pure play cloud SaaS application. So your application has a database, and obviously it has an OS to run the database. And many times I see that's not in scope. So be sure to include that in scope. We have some tools that can do the certification across the stack. So you're not just looking at applications and having that false sense of security where somebody comes in and attacks you at the database level and you miss out on the controls there. So please take a look at the entire stack, not just the top layer, the application layer, which we have been talking about for a long time. The other part that you have to consider is who should review this. It's one thing for me to review my direct employees' access, and that might be okay for some things, but it's another to really assign people ownership of entitlements and roles. And that's where the market is moving, and that's where the guidance is coming ultimately from PCAOB to the external auditors, that, hey, we don't want rubber stamps, right? We've been doing that for a long time. We want somebody independent from the manager of the employee to be able to go in and verify that this person truly needs access, ongoing access to this role or entitlement, and being able to then terminate that access, right? Give them options on how to terminate that access as part of your access review. So if you're using ServiceNow as an example, where does it get routed to, right? All that routing information should be embedded. And ideally, your access review system, like for example in SafePaaS, you can do that, should integrate with that ITSM system like ServiceNow. So that lag that I just talked about is a key problem in remediation, goes away. And so the way I look at it, your front door is locked, there's less chance of somebody just walk in. The longer you leave it open, more likely you are to have somebody come in uninvited and you have no controls over it, right? And the last piece that gets overlooked often if you're new to this area is the tie-out reports, right? So auditors want to be able to verify that what you said is what happened, right? So you said, I'm going to take away access of these 10 contractors that are no longer in my business. They don't need access to general ledger. They were part of an implementation from an implementation partner. They moved on. I need to terminate them. Did you actually do that? I can see a ticket that says it's done, but has it actually been removed from the ERP system, from eBusiness Suite in this case, as an example? So that variance and verification analysis is really important. And obviously with SafePaaS, you get that as part of the overall solution for OCI and data governance. So hopefully that helps you on the PR. Let's continue moving in the interest of time. The next slide talks about the monitoring of activities. So now that we have cleaned up our system, let's call that the first line of defense. Now you've got actual user population, like I said earlier, that has to have access to do their jobs, right? And now we have to figure out how are these users and identities actually accessing the data. And some will be coming in nicely to the applications, others are running third-party, or even Oracle provided analytics tools through a query. You may have some heavy lifting technical folks that are using, just basically SQL in a different format. And so now you've got another, and Emma said this the other day, we've got multi-point security problem, right? Because you have many areas, many entry points into your e-business stack, all the way from the application layer through these tools to the BI and to the database directly, right? So what we're really excited about is being able to leverage some of the new technology from Oracle, which is the unified auditing capability. It's extremely more useful now than it ever was with the old Data Vault, Audit Vault. If you've been in cybersecurity for a long time, you would know those were the early products, and they were heavy in the footprint. It took forever to implement them, and had a steep learning curve. And most customers abandoned them after some use because the volume of data that comes out is just unmanageable. It's just not useful, right? So you're ending up with more problems than you can understand or manage, and you don't know what's the risk level, high, medium, low, whatever it is, right? So with this new technology, you can use it out of the box, by the way, so you don't need SafePaaS for this. You can go out today and start using it. The challenge is it's pretty cryptic, like most Oracle backend tools, but it has certain advantages, which I want to highlight to you if you decide to go and use it. If you need some free kind of lessons learned from us, please arrange that through Emma. We'll be glad to help you. No commitment to SafePaaS, but we just want to help bring the risk down across the enterprise in your organizations. So we'll help you explain how that works. The challenge is it generates, the good news, let me tell you the packages. So your DBA cannot go and disable it like you could disable audit on a table. So you're protected there. You can limit who can access this package. It works, does not impact their performance. That's the beautiful beauty about this, right? So unlike layer that you had to put on top of your database, you don't have to do that. It's independent. There's no performance impact. Oracle's done some benchmarking, which I've shared at the bottom of this slide, which you can see that it's really quick, and it doesn't hammer you, which was a big constraint or obstacle in enabling audit. But it still has some of those same challenges. It's cryptic. You have to have lots of knowledge of the Oracle database, and people that typically need information are auditors or compliance folks that should not be technically messing around with the database. So now you got to go through a DBA, which sort of defeats the purpose of having this, because DBA can obviously not be independent in some case. So even though you have really honest and capable people working, your auditors will not trust that information back to the IPE constraints, information provided by entity, right? So your auditors can't really trust that information. They have to verify independently. So by using a tool like SafePaaS, if you just choose it or want to see it, that'll streamline all that and give the end users the capability to extract the report and enable your administrators to enable the capability without having to learn all this new domain expertise and so forth, that we have done it for you, right? So that's some of the benefits of using the UI within SafePaaS. It also has workflows and incident management. So it's not just like spewing a bunch of data every day. It's actually going to analyze based on rules logic to what is important based on your risk profiles, your tolerance levels to that risk, and then send it out to the right people responsible in a closed loop fashion, right? So that enables you to have a process in place around data governance, as opposed to a kind of an ad hoc report, which is not really a process or a control, right? So hopefully that helps you. That's the second base control that I wanted to discuss with you today. Let's move on to the third piece that I mentioned in the control section. So now we're talking about, okay, we've got monitoring turned on, second line of defense for the insiders. We have stopped the outsider by doing good access certification and removed all the zombies and the inactive accounts that shouldn't be assigned to folks. So now we got to just make sure that as these problems, and now we're moving more to the BAU, business as usual, or a steady state. So now you're getting these incidents coming out on a periodic basis, whether they're daily, monthly. You can set the frequency depending on your own, dynamics as a company. So if you have lots of changes, obviously you want to test those controls more often because your risk is elevated. If you have no changes, you're really steady state EBS customers that basically just wants to check the audit box, compliance box, and you don't have a lot of population changes. You're not deploying EBS anywhere else. So you can also take a low frequency approach to this, right? So you're looking at maybe monthly or less frequently even then. So what we see on this risk assessment is you got to lock down your default accounts, right? There's some things that are just no-brainers. You can go do that today. Check if you have done that. Your OCI administrators have done that. Most likely they have, but it's funny how often I find that everybody intends to do that, but somehow with all the juggling of balls, these things get dropped off, right? So that's a no-brainer. Ensure every privilege account in a database that is configured with strong passwords. So some just housekeeping, clean housekeeping reminders to everybody to just verify that. If you're using an IDM system, obviously it should be integrated into your OCI so that you can prevent those kinds of issues from happening. And then, as I mentioned before, follow the principle of least privilege when granting access. So don't give everybody system DBA access, right? Just because they want to query a report. And those are some things might sound pretty obvious, but I just mentioned them because often this checklist is not verified till the audit starts, and then auditors find things, and customers have findings, and shows up on a board minute somewhere, and it just creates a lot of pressure on the IT organization. And we're the friends of the IT, right? So we're here to help you guys. So yeah, if you're using IDM, like I said, that's my other advice. Just share that. The other last point I will make is just patch it up, right? Keep your security patches up to date. If you're using, depending on which version of Oracle OCI you're using, which methodology you're using, Oracle can, there's like a much easier way to patch your OS and DB now through literally just the easy button, as opposed to the complicated patch cycles that many had to do on premise. So keep that in mind. So yeah, that's kind of the key advice on remediation. One thing I guess I mentioned before, I'll just remind you again that if you are using third-party tools like ServiceNow for remediation, please make sure they're integrated. So there's a closed loop. In other words, not just reporting the ticket out, but also coming the status back to show was the issue resolved or not, right? Okay, so let's move on to the last point. I think that's the last point, yeah, before I go into the case study. So last point, as I said, audit evidence, right? So now you've got good controls in place, you've done remediation, but now your auditors come in and say, hey, tell me everything about your controls. How do you control cyber threats? How do you control access, identity risks, security, all that, right? Now you got to have some good reports to be able to show it to them and point to make your life easier. Otherwise, guess who's staying up late working, missing Halloween, right? It's you. So if you want to go trick and treating, you've got to get this right. Maintain audit evidence. So a detailed chronological record of all the activities that were part of this cycle. So starting from that access review you did to the monitoring you're doing continuously, hopefully, or frequently, and to the remediation you did. All of that needs to be tied nicely together with a bow on top, right? And that's what you need to be able to prove out as a result of doing all this hard work so that it actually matters. So the auditors believe that it's actually an effective control. That's the term they'll use, right? Is your control effective or not? And they need that information all to tie out. So an audit trail is basically a regulatory requirement, as I said, through all these frameworks of that you are obligated in many cases to comply with, right? So you've got to be able to provide that audit trail of all these activities that are happening, and it should be made available to the auditors to verify and track all these types of transactions that I've mentioned, right? So what that means is it'll take a lot of time to do it manually, right? And that's why a lot of our customers just throw that to SafePaaS, say, you guys figure that out. I don't have time. Or I can't just go hire 3 people just to do that every 3 months or every 6 months. So SafePaaS just basically is kind of an active platform. That's what we call ourselves, is an active governance platform, right? So it actively does all this for you, and it sends out reminders. It escalates if people aren't doing what they're supposed to do with their control or remediation or tickets. So that's what makes it really easy. You can focus on your, customers and your suppliers and your employees and all that important stuff, and let SafePaaS continuously manage and actively manage this step for you and generate the right level of audit logs, which will safeguard, put all these safeguards in your business, essentially on your ERP system that's on OCI or whatever cloud you choose to go with. It will also segregate. That's an important part that often people forget when they're doing a business drivers or business case for SafePaaS. That, hey, I could write some code, I could do it. I can hire a couple of developers and build something. The thing is, all SafePaaS is also doing is putting it all in a separate audit vault. Let's use that term lowercase. An audit system where your auditors can get to and rely on it, which is, by the way, tested by independent auditors. We use independent auditors for SOC 1 and SOC 2. So the reliability factor goes 10x, maybe 100x, right? You don't have to provide screenshots and sampling and all of that stuff because SafePaaS just does that for you. It's an independent platform. Your IT people can't go, your DBAs can't go and tamper with the data, and your auditors would love that for you, and you won't have to work as hard to get this done. So that's an important aspect of maintaining an audit evidence. Okay, that concludes, in summary, the time we had today on what tips you can take on this Halloween afternoon to go and make your cyber threats go away, right? Now we're going to talk about the case study. Case study is a is a leading global company, but it's one of the largest top 5 semiconductors in the globe. It's the, I think, second or third largest company in Europe. So we're talking about a fairly complex business challenge, and they use, or one of their business units that we're talking about here uses Oracle e-business suite. Basically, they were moving to OCI, and the management was concerned at the corporate level in Europe of putting data in the cloud for all the reasons and more that I've shared with you earlier. And so that was the business driver. You don't today just go out and throw money at a problem unless it's driven by all that, compelling events and business needs and so forth. So we went through that process with them. Took us a couple of weeks to just, help them map their needs into the SafePaaS solution, to make sure that it checks all their boxes for all the compliance. You can imagine a global company will have many more regulatory requirements than, let's say, a company that's based here in Texas, where I am. So there were a number of challenges we uncovered as we were discovering their pain points, starting with their infrastructure. They had multiple instances of different ERP systems, and eventually they want to roll this out to across the globe to everything, right? And so that's kind of the complex. So we said, okay, let's start with quick wins. We want those quick wins to, success to lead to the future work, right? So now we're doing additional work as a result of success we had addressing the challenges. So complex challenges. I mentioned the parent company already. They had some very specific data protection issues based on EU requirements beyond just GDPR, because they're in a sensitive business that's considered strategic to the country they operate in, right? And their auditors, they had plenty of great auditors. They worked with all the major audit firms in the world, and really, impressive folks, credentialed over there. But the oversight was just not meshing with the IT folks, right? Because they were asking very high-level audit questions, and many of you know us, so you know that we have many major audit firms work with us, as well as a number of their ex-auditors work at SafePaaS, helps advise customers as well. So that helped them kind of see how to communicate this challenge and the solution to get the buy-in from the auditors. Now, auditors are typically independent, so they're not you can't go to the auditors and say, hey, tell us what we should implement. They're not gonna, because if they tell you, then they can't test it and control it. So they want to stay independent. So we had to help kind of coordinate that conversation between the groups. And they didn't have centralized IT, which was another challenge because they were kind of a holding company model. They are a holding company model. They don't have everything tucked away in a single seamless Oracle e-business suite behind a firewall, right? There are multiple uh, uh, feeds into different systems to be able to report eventually to the European parent company. So the solution we offered them was to take what they were doing and expand on that, right? The company has some really good controls. It's just that they weren't granular enough, so the auditors couldn't trust it. For example, if you're reviewing roles at the database level that don't really provide the privilege level details, or for that matter, if you're doing application roles and you're not doing database roles, or if you're doing database roles but not OS IDs, it just kind of falls apart. You can see how the layers go on and on, right? So you have to cover that full fine-grained privileges at each level the user has access: application, database, OS, network, AD, Active Directory, whatever you're using, Azure, Okta, right? All of those make up the fine-grained control part of your lifecycle management of the identity in today's world, right? And then the second piece that we offered them, which I've just shared with you, was tracking of changes to the database objects. Now, one thing you can do is turn on audit on a table, supplier table today, and get that, right? And I'll suggest go ahead and do that. The challenge is that the data that you'll get is going to be scattered across 12 tables if you're using EBS. You've got the header table, the detail table, you've got payment tables. So now you've got to scratch your head and say, I've got 4,000 attributes. Which top 10 or 20 that I can actually track, and how do I create a consolidated view? Not easy to do. You can try that even with some of the most modern reporting tools, and our customers have tried that, and it's a nightmare, right? So to avoid the nightmare, we offered them this solution where we have the ability to track everything through this new technology that I mentioned that's available for Oracle database 12 and above, 12.2 and above, I think it is. But you can see the details on our website. So we enabled, the solution was to enable audit capabilities using the unified audit and not use the old audit. They had tried that and it wasn't working for them. So we migrated all that over. And then the last point under the solutions column, you'll see database query tracking. That was like the big aha for the customer, right? Because if you worked with Oracle for a long time, you know that you always get this question. And in my lifetime working with Oracle for 25 years, I could never answer that question satisfactorily to an auditor. Can you tell me how many people have viewed employee salaries over the last audit period, or supplier bank accounts, or customer credit limits, or pricing changes? You get those questions in your audit. That's one of the questions you'll get if you are getting audited for data protection, data privacy. And the answer is a very uncomfortable no, because it was never possible unless you buy millions of dollars of software to do that. And even that was sort of hit and miss. But now with this native capability that we have in SafePaaS, we can tell you every day within minutes if somebody has run a query on an employee salary account or a supplier bank account or whatever it is, right? So that was a big aha moment that I think more than paid for the whole solution within months, right? Because that's something they were really struggling with. They were doing what we call compensating controls or substantive testing, and none of that is quite foolproof. But now this is a complete tight solution. And to me, that's the most exciting part for me, helping the customer become successful with SafePaaS. So if you haven't looked into this, please Google it. You might find this on our website. You will certainly find an Oracle website. Or if you want to talk to me more about it, reach out to us through Emma. I'll be glad to share all this information. You can go do it on your own. You don't have to use no obligations. You don't have to use SafePaaS. So at the end of the day, as we're coming to the end of the session, the big success factor, success for this client was the ability to get that visibility across the complete tech stack, right? Which was the demand from the auditor. So down from, we can show that. That's even better than my words. So we were able to go in at this level and show them the details. So you see this periodic access review screen. We're doing it for the full tech stack. So we can do surveys for the application layer, for the database layer, for the OS layer, and then we can segment them out. So if you're running OCI, multiple OCI instances, we can, in different regions, unless you're a global company, which this company is. So multiple OCI instances in Europe, in US, other places, you can do that for each of those pods and see where the risk is and how to mitigate that risk. So these screens are a little bit hard to read, but we'll give you the presentation, I'm sure, and I will get this out to you. And you can see that these screens will show you all the details that you need to build up an audit evidence on when the audit was sent out, who was receiving this audit or the certification for periodic access review. Was it a primary person responsible or secondary person? Did anybody approve their own, right? That's one of the very common rookie mistakes people make. They send it out, but then the person reviewing, they can also review their own access and nobody questions till the auditor comes in and puts a big old finding on top of you to ruin your day, right? So you got to be able to see that level of detail. You also got to be able to see, okay, the capability to route it, right? So I sent it to a primary, but they weren't in the office because of Halloween break. I sent it to a secondary, they're out because it's also Diwali in India, right? So you got to be able to maneuver through your real world situations when you do access reviews. It's very hard to do that in emails and spreadsheets, or even a lot of the tools, legacy tools that were in the market years ago, right? So SafePaaS provides that modernization. Next slide. And this is the monitoring piece. You can see we can connect to a cloud OCI instance through JDBC, but we can also do, depending how you've configured it, we can connect any which way, right? We can do APIs, REST, SOAP, a flat file, whatever you give us, we can grab it. And we can then enable, as we're showing in this screen, unified auditing straight from SafePaaS, click of a button. You don't have to go spend weeks and weeks with consultants or bring in database experts or use up your own DBA skills on this project. You can literally install SafePaaS and within the day enable auditing to get up and running, right? And you can do it on obviously a non-prod environment and then move it to prod the next day. And it will communicate with the auditing packages. And guess what? It's all independent from your privileged access users, right? Which is another control that we didn't talk about today, but we spent a lot of time writing about privileged access management because that's where a lot of the cyber threats are also happening. So that's as simple as a click. And the end of the day, what you see is these types of select statements. So obviously for this presentation, I'm not using customer data. So we just ran this on our own database, which is our own database schema. You can see SIS has run these queries, what queries they've run, and there's drill down underneath it, right? So we're able to drill down into supplier table, into employee table, et cetera, to see exactly where a DBA has run these queries and be able to then, if they fall outside of our threshold level, like let's say they've run a query on supplier bank accounts, forget even updating, just querying it, why would you query that? And that's an exception, that's the rule, that's an exception based on your policy. SafePaaS is all about access governance based on policies. We will route that incident to their manager, let's say your IT security organization. They'll say, oh, wow, why did the DBA run this? And you'll be able to then log an incident. It'll even log it back into your ITSM system like ServiceNow as a problem, root cause problem, and they have to explain. So closed loop, which is the audit evidence you're now building for change management, that will significantly improve your outcomes in your audits, not to mention prevent the cybersecurity threats. Next slide. So yeah, this shows you the rule sets that I talked about earlier, right? So you can result sets based on rules. So you can see that you can set up the select statements, and then you can decide which of these select statements are okay, which ones are not. So you can see in the second last column, XX as SafePaaS employee audit is basically a table that is copying the employee information, and it's a table that is not your typical per people HR table if you're EBS customer, right? It's a different table, but we have somebody's copied that table into a custom table, and somebody's running a query on that custom table. So we're protecting the enterprise, the entire database, not just the one table you select. It'll go against the entire schema, and without adding any overhead, audit overhead that you had to deal with in the old days. OCI makes it really easy. Okay, next slide. Yeah, I think we're done. Okay, great. So thank you for listening today, and hope this helps. And are there any questions in the last minute or two? I kind of took up a little longer than I expected.
We have had a couple of questions. So question here, we've opted for a multi-cloud strategy. So can you walk us through briefly some of the best practices for multi-cloud governance?
Yeah, so I mean, realistically, almost all our customers, I'd say more than 80% of our customers are multi-cloud. And so we deal with that every day. And I kind of briefly mentioned that earlier, that even within OCI, you can be multi-cloud in the sense that you have data residency requirements in multiple places. But yeah, just let me address the question directly on multi-cloud. The challenge with multi-cloud is your identities are now have to be cross-linked across those clouds to identify true policy risk to your policies, right? So if you have a policy of, let's say, creating suppliers and paying suppliers and using, let's say, Coupa or Ariba or one of these systems to manage suppliers, but the payments are coming from your EBS or Cloud ERP, whatever other system, you're a multi-cloud problem, right? So now how do you enforce policies like that? SafePaaS enables you through its data probe technology with multi-point security to bring in these security entry points from all of these cloud infrastructures and clouds and be able to help you build policies, which is cross-platform, multi-cloud policies, which will then identify those risks that you will not identify by running tools embedded within those products, right? Same thing with Workday. I see a lot of this with Workday. A lot of Oracle customers have chosen to stay with EBS or PeopleSoft, whatever, but they've moved HCM to Workday, right? Or they may even have gone to Cloud ERP and they've moved HCM to Workday. That's a very common thing. Same thing with Salesforce. So we see this multi-cloud against all these massive platforms that customers are using as part of their migration to cloud or digital platform. And we provide protection by helping you build policies. The simple answer is we help you connect through policies across your data sources.
Great. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us today, and a huge thank you to you, Adil, for sharing your insight. We hope you're able to take away some of the best practices we've shared and solutions to ensure that the monsters remain at bay. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Have a good one. Thanks.